So, first of all, thank you so much for joining this session and taking out your time. I'm Rupal Shrotriya, PhD scholar in social work, and my work broadly focuses on mental health, behavior, and everyday psychosocial influences. And I would really like to thank LiF NGO and MENTOVA for giving me this opportunity to conduct this session. It really means a lot to be able to discuss something so relevant with all of you. Now, before I begin the actual session, I want to do one small thing with you all. Just think for a second. When you saw this topic, movies, OTT, mindset, you already had some thoughts, right? Some of you might be thinking it's just entertainment. Why so serious? Or, yes, it affects us. Or maybe I'm overusing it. And honestly, your responses reflected the same. A lot of you asked how to control this, how to separate real and real life. Is it actually affecting us or are we overthinking? So before we move ahead, जो भी आपके pre-consumed thoughts हैं, just keep them aside for a while. Not remove them, बस थोड़ी देर के लिए उनको side में रख देते हैं. And one very important thing I want to clarify from the beginning is that I'm not blaming or saying that any target, like I'm not targeting any platform, any show or any series or any character here. बिकॉज अगर प्रॉब्लम इतनी ही सिंपल होती कि कंटेंट ही गलत है तो सॉल्यूशन भी बहुत सिंपल हो जाता. हम काफी पहले उसको बॉयकॉट कर चुके होते, राइट? बट रियलिटी इज स्लाइटली डिफरेंट. वी आर नॉट जस्ट वॉचिंग कंटेंट एनीमोर, हम उसके साथ इंगेज करते हैं. सेम कंटेंट 10 लोग देखते हैं लेकिन सबका इम्पैक्ट अलग अलग होता है, क्योंकि किसी के लिए वो सिर्फ एक एंटरटेनमेंट का पार्ट है, किसी के लिए वो रिलेटेबल हो जाता है और किसी के लिए वो पर्सनल फील होने लगता है. So the real question is not what we watch, but how we match to it. Ankit, could you please move to the next slide? Yes, thank you. So, all right, let's start from something very basic but very important. When we say media as a contemporary social environment, what does that actually mean? It simply means that media is no longer something outside of our life. It has become a part of our environment, almost like people, places, and situations around us. If you observe your own routine for a second, आप सुबह उठते हो, सबसे पहले फोन चेक करते हो. वाइल ईटिंग कुछ ना कुछ चल रहा होता है. ट्रैवलिंग के टाइम पर भी ईयरफोन्स लगा के हम लोग कंटेंट कंज्यूम कर रहे होते हैं. और रात को सोने से पहले भी हमारा लास्ट इंस्ट्रक्शन थ्रू मीडिया ही होता है. So if we think about it, media is not something we go to anymore, but it is something we like already constantly living in. And this is exactly why this topic becomes important. Earlier media was occasional, weekend पे movie, family के साथ TV, fixed time for shows. But now with smartphones or OTT platform, there is no limitation. आप कभी भी देख सकते हो, कहीं भी देख सकते हो, किसी के साथ भी देख सकते हो और अकेले भी देख सकते हो. So consumption has become very frequent, very personal, and very continuous. Now, let me connect this to some of the questions many of you asked. One of you mentioned, how do movies and OTT affect people and their way of living and behavior? So this slide is actually the starting point of that answer. Because when something becomes part of your environment, it automatically starts influencing, even if you don't notice it. For example, imagining you are sitting in a room where a certain type of music is playing, even if you're not actively listening to it, but आपका mind उसको धीरे धीरे adapt करने लगता है. Same things happen with media also. If you are constantly surrounded by certain type of stories, emotions, lifestyles, or behaviors, so they slowly become your reference point. Let me give you a very simple real life example. Suppose someone regularly watches high paced content, reels, intense scenes, quick edits. So now when that person sits to study or to do normal work, suddenly everything will feel slow and boring. Now, because not the work is boring, but because their environment has trained their brain to accept constant simulation. And this directly connects to another question someone asked, that how do we control ourselves from OTT and TV? So I would like to answer it like कंट्रोल तब पॉसिबल होता है जब आपको ये समझ आता है कि ये सिर्फ एंटरटेनमेंट नहीं है, बल्कि ये आपका एक एनवायरनमेंट बन चुका है. बिकॉज यू कैन नॉट कंट्रोल समथिंग अनलेस you recognize its role in your life. So another important point here is individualized consumption. Earlier, people used to watch content together, फैमिली के साथ, फ्रेंड्स के साथ, तो डिस्कशन होती थी, इंटरप्रिटेशन शेयर्ड होता था. बट नाउ मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम वी आर वॉचिंग इट अलोन. और जब आप अलोन कंज्यूम करते हो तो जो आप फील कर रहे होते हो वो डायरेक्टली आपके अंदर ही प्रोसेस हो जाता है. देयर इज नो एक्सटर्नल चेक, राइट? सो लेट्स से यू वॉच समथिंग इमोशनली इंटेंस. अगर आप फैमिली के साथ देख रहे हो तो बाद में डिस्कशन हो जाता है. समवन सेज दिस वाज अनरियलिस्टिक, समवन सेज दिस वाज भाई बहुत बढ़ा चढ़ा के दिखाया गया है, बट व्हेन यू वॉच इट अलोन द फिल्टर इज मिसिंग, और तभी आपका इंटरनलाइजेशन बिकम्स डीपर. यस, नेक्स्ट स्लाइड प्लीज. So now, after understanding that media has become part of our environment, the next thing we need to look at it its scale. How much time are we actually spending on it? Because influence का level directly exposure के level से linked होता है. If we look at our current patterns, on average, individuals spend around 6 to 7 hours per day on screen-based activities. अगर इसको yearly देखें, it comes close to like 2400 in a year, which is almost 100 full days. Now just think about for that second. साल के like year के 365 दिन में से आप लगभग 100 दिन सिर्फ स्क्रीन के साथ. यहाँ एक इम्पॉर्टेंट शिफ्ट समझना जरूरी है. मीडिया कोई साइड एक्टिविटी नहीं है, ये कोई ऐसी चीज नहीं है जो हम कभी कभी करते हैं. इट हैज बिकम अ डोमिनेंट पार्ट ऑफ अ डेली लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस. एंड this directly connects to one of the questions many of you ask: how do movies and OTT affect people and their way of living or behavior? So the first layer of that answer is not even content, it is time. Let me explain this in a very simple way. अगर आप रोज 6 to 7 आवर्स घंटे किसी भी चीज के साथ स्पेंड करते हो, चाहे वो लोग हो, एनवायरमेंट हो, कोई एक्टिविटी हो, तो उसका इन्फ्लुएंस नेचुरली आपकी थिंकिंग और बिहेवियर पर आएगा ही आएगा. बट वी डोंट क्वेश्चन दिस इन अदर एरियाज ऑफ लाइफ, स्पेशली व्हेन इट कम्स टू मीडिया. हम एज्यूम कर लेते हैं कि इट डजंट मैटर. Another question someone asked was, how impactful is it on ground level? So on ground level, impact से start होता है volume of exposure. Because जब कोई चीज इतना ज्यादा टाइम ऑक्यूपाई कर रही होती है, it starts becoming your regular input system. For example, if a large portion of your day is spent engaging with screen-based content, then naturally a significant portion of your thoughts, your reactions, and even daily structure will start aligning around that time. Not suddenly, but धीरे धीरे हो जाता है. Also, one of you asked, how can we control ourselves from phone, OTT, and TV? कंट्रोल समझने से पहले ये समझना जरूरी है कि हम कितना टाइम दे रहे हैं. तो जब तक आपको अपनी एक्सपोजर का एक्चुअल स्केल क्लियर नहीं होता, तब तक कंट्रोल करना एब्स्ट्रैक्ट ही लगता है. So the first step is not restriction. The first step is the realization कि हम जब जिस चीज को नॉर्मल समझ रहे हैं वो एक्चुअली कितना सिग्निफिकेंट है. एंड दिस स्लाइड एक्चुअली वही हाईलाइट करता है. मीडिया इज नॉट लॉन्गर स्मॉल पार्ट ऑफ लाइफ, but it is occupying a major portion of our time. And anything that takes this much time will naturally influence cognition, emotions, and behavior. So what are the key takeaway here is influence starts with exposure, और जब exposure इतना large हो जाता है तो इसका impact ignore करना possible नहीं होता. Yes, Ankit, could you please move to the next slide? Yes, from exposure to influence. Now, this is where the discussion becomes slightly deeper. Till now, we talked about exposure, how much time we spend, but the real concern is not exposure alone. The real concern is what that exposure does to us over time. Because influence does not happen in a very direct or dramatic way. ऐसा नहीं होता कि आपने कुछ देखा और नेक्स्ट डे आप बिल्कुल चेंज हो गए. That's not how it works. And this directly connects to one of the questions many of you ask. How do movies and OTT change our mindsets? So the answer is like not instantly, but gradually. Let me explain this very simply. When you continuously engage with emotionally rich content, जहाँ strong emotions, strong narratives, strong reactions दिखाए जाते हैं, your mind starts getting used to processing situation in a similar emotional pattern. For example, suppose you regularly watch content where situations are highly intense, reactions are always strong, and outcomes are always dramatic. Over time, even in real life, normal situations can start feeling either underwhelming or sometimes more emotionally charged than they actually are. ये कॉन्शियस इमिटेशन नहीं है. आप डिसाइड नहीं कर रहे कि आपको ऐसे बिहेव करना है, बट इट्स अ ग्रेजुअल शिफ्ट इन परसेप्शन एंड इमोशनल रिस्पॉन्स. Another question someone asked was, what are the real impacts of character on us? सो अगेन, इम्पैक्ट ये नहीं होता कि हम उनकी एग्जैक्ट कॉपी बन जाते हैं. इम्पैक्ट ये होता है कि हम उनकी ट्रू सिचुएशंस को देखना स्टार्ट कर देते हैं. सपोज आपने कोई मर्डर रिलेटेड सीरीज देखी, बैक टू बैक आपने, एल्गोरिदम सेट हो जाता है, राइट? आपने एक देखी, फिर आपको रेफरेंस आया, आपने दूसरी देखी, ऐसे आप देखते चले गए. नेक्स्ट डे ऐसा नहीं है कि आप मर्डर करने के लिए चले जाओगे, लेकिन आपको चीजें सस्पिशियस लगनी चालू हो जाएगी. For instance, if you repeatedly see certain types of response being shown in as normal or justified, your brain start accepting that response as familiar. और जो familiar होता है वो comfortable लगता है. Similarly, one of you asked, how do movies and shows influence thoughts and behavior in daily life? So the influence work like this. First, आप exposed होते हो. Then you start understanding patterns. Then those patterns start feeling normal. And slowly they begin to reflect in your thinking and reactions. And importantly, it's not about one scene, one movie, or one show. It is about continuous engagement over time, which slowly shapes how we interpret situations, how we react emotionally, or how we orient our behavior. Right? So yes, Ankit, the next slide, please. Now to understand media influence properly, we need to break it down into how exactly it operates inside us. Because influence is not just one thing, it works at multiple levels. And this slide explains those four levels in a very structured. Like, let's start with the cognition. Cognition simply means how we think and how we interpret situations. And one of you asked to how to understand visual media influence thoughts. So this is where the answer begins. When you repeatedly watch certain types of situations being presented in a particular way, your brain starts using those patterns to interpret real life situations. For example, if you constantly see situations being shown in a very simplified or one-sided way, in real life also you may start expecting situations to be equally simple, but real life is usually more complex, right? तो यहाँ चेंज ये नहीं है कि आप कॉन्शियसली कुछ कॉपी कर रहे हो, चेंज ये है कि आपके सोचने का फ्रेमवर्क शिफ्ट हो रहा है. नाउ कम्स इमोशंस. This answers another common question many of you had. How does media influence emotions and mental state? So when you are repeatedly exposed to emotionally rich content, your emotions reactions also start getting shaped accordingly. For instance, if certain types of reactions are shown as intense or exaggerated again and again, You may start feeling situations are more strongly than required in real life. ये कभी कभी अपोजिट भी हो जाता है. If you are exposed to too much emotional content over time, and you might feel sorry you might feel slightly numb to normal situations. Again, ये conscious decision नहीं है, it is emotional conditioning. Now comes behavior. So yes, this connects directly to one of your questions: how do movies and shows affect behavior in real life? So behavioral influence does not mean copying exact actions. It means your response pattern starts shifting. For example, the way you react in situations, the way you communicate, the way you respond under pressure. These can slowly get influenced by what you repeatedly observe. आप consciously decide नहीं करते कि मुझे ऐसे behave करना है, but over time, certain ways of reacting start feeling more natural. Now, the last and very important part, lifestyle expectations. So, whenever you ask, how do OTT platforms affect people's way of living? This is exactly where the answer fits. When you continuously see certain types of lifestyles, routines, or I might say way of living being shows repeatedly, you start forming an idea what is normal or what is ideal. For example, what kind of life feels satisfying, what kind of routine feels acceptable, or what kind of pace feels right. These expectations don't come from nowhere. They are gradually shaped by our repeated exposure. और प्रॉब्लम तब होती है जब रियल लाइफ और ये एक्सपेक्टेशन मैच नहीं करते, राइट. सो key takeaway from the slide is media influence is multi-layered. It is not just about behavior. It starts from thinking, then moves to emotion, then reflects in behavior, and then finally shapes expectations. Yes. Next slide, please. Structural transformation. Yes. Now, let's understand how media consumption itself has changed over time. Because ये transformation समझना बहुत important है. The slide is not about impact directly, but about how the structure of watching has completely shifted. Earlier, content used to be scheduled. आपका एक फिक्स टाइम है, टीवी शो देखने का होता है. इफ यू मिस्ड इट, यू मिस्ड इट. बट नाउ एवरीथिंग इज ऑन डिमांड. आप कभी भी देख सकते हो, पॉज कर सकते हो, रिज्यूम कर सकते हो, रिप्ले कर सकते हो, आपकी अपनी मर्जी है. Content is available according to your convenience, not the other way around, right? So, second major change, earlier content was mostly watched collectively. फैमिली के साथ टीवी देखना, फिर डिस्कशन होना, उस पर रिएक्शन शेयर करना, दैट वाज कंप्लीटली नॉर्मल. नाउ मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम कंटेंट कंजप्शन हैज बिकम इंडिविजुअल. हर किसी की अपनी स्क्रीन है, हर किसी का अपना कंटेंट है, हर किसी के पास अपना अलग टाइम है. So this directly connects to one of your questions, Gen Z and their inclination towards OTT platforms. So one major reason is the shift towards personal viewing. Because individual consumption gives more freedom. You choose what you want, when you want, right? So, but at the same time, एक subtle change ये भी होता है कि interpretation भी individual हो जाता है. Earlier, if something was unrealistic, कोई ना कोई point out कर देता था. नाउ आप जब आप देखते हो उसको प्रोसेसिंग मोस्टली आपके अंदर ही होता है. द थर्ड शिफ्ट इज अबाउट कंटिन्यूटी. अर्लियर एक्सपोजर लिमिटेड था, एक शो, एक मूवी, फिक्स ड्यूरेशन. नाउ एंगेजमेंट हैज बिकम कॉन्टिन्यूअस. देयर इज नो नेचुरल स्टॉपिंग पॉइंट. कंटेंट एक के बाद एक अवेलेबल है. So if we combine all the three shifts, from fixed time to anything access, from shared viewings to personal viewing, from limited content to continuous availability, you can clearly say that media is no longer structured around us in a controlled way, right? It is now open, flexible, and constant. Yeah. Can we move to the next slide, please? Psychological mechanism. Yeah. So now that we understand that media influences us, the next important question is how exactly does this influence happen around inside our mind? Because ये कोई random process नहीं है. It follows certain psychological mechanisms, and this slide explains three very important ones. Let's start with repetition. When we are exposed to similar things again and again, our brain starts treating them as familiar. और जो चीजें familiar होती है वो gradually normal लगने लगती है. It's a very natural human behavior. For example, if certain types of behavior, lifestyles, or reactions are shown repeatedly across different content, even without agreeing consciously, your mind starts accepting them as this is how things usually are. ये immediate change नहीं होता, but over time, repetition creates a sense of acceptability. Now, the second mechanism is emotional engagement. So, whenever content triggers strong emotions, whether it is excitement, tension, happiness, or even discomfort, those moments get stored more strongly in memory. And when something is remembered strongly, it also becomes more influential. You're more likely to remember it, think about it, and sometimes even relate it to your own life situations later. यहाँ important point ये है that it is not about just watching. It is about how deeply you feel while watching. Now, the third mechanism, when you see situations, characters, or settings that feel familiar, your brain processes them as something closer to reality. For example, if you see everyday situations being shown in a certain way, you may start relating them to your own life experiences. और जब relatability increase होती है, internalization भी increase हो जाता है. This doesn't mean you believe everything is real, but somewhere you start applying those interpretations while understanding your own situations. So if I put it all together, repetition makes things feel normal. Emotion makes things feel important. A relatability makes things feel real. And when something feels normal, important, or real at the same time, it becomes much more likely to influence more and more people or their mindsets. Yes. Could you please move to the next slide? Emotional identification is a critical skill. Now, this slide talks about something very crucial. The exact point where media influence becomes personal. Till a certain stage, we're just watching content. We know it's fictional. It's not created. But at some point, a shift happens. We start feeling connected. One of you asks, the real impact of the characters, like how does that happen? So there is the answer. When you emotionally connect with a character or a story, that content stops feeling distant. It starts feeling personally meaningful. Let me explain this with a very simple and relatable example. Think about superheroes. When someone watches superhero content repeatedly, especially from a younger age, they don't just watch the character, they start admiring the qualities, strength, confidence, control, always being right. Nah. So no one thinks I want to become exactly like the character, but somewhere internally, those qualities become ideal traits. So in real life, when they face such situations, they may start expecting themselves to react with the same level of confidence or control. And when that happens, they may feel inadequate. ये coping नहीं है, पर ये internal expectations build होना है. Let's take another example. Disney princess. Many of us has grown up watching those stories, right? Perfect life, perfect situation, everything falling into place in the end. Now again, consciously we know it's fictional, but emotionally, those narratives create a certain idea of how life should feel. So, uh, so later in real life, when things are uncertain, slow, or imperfect, it may feel like something is missing. Missing कुछ भी नहीं है, गलत कुछ भी नहीं है, but because expectations एक different narrative से shape हुआ है. Now, next slide please. Sorry. Let's move from concepts to what research actually shows. Because till now we have understood how influence works. But this slide answers what are the actual outcomes observed across studies. Research shows that higher exposure to emotionally intense content is associated with increased anxiety and emotional strain. Now, this doesn't mean every viewer becomes anxious, but when happiness, your mind stays in a heightened emotional state more often. For example, if someone regularly consumes content where situations are constantly tense, uncertain, or emotionally heavy, their brain starts staying slightly alert even in normal situations. It's like your mind is always expecting something to happen, even when कुछ हो भी नहीं रहा होता. A very if I take a very simple real life situation, you finish something intense and then you sit quietly, but your mind is still active. You feel slightly restless, थोड़ा uneasy, but you can't explain exactly why. और funny part क्या है कि जब ऐसा होता है, जब हम भी किसी भी इंटेंस सीन या एक इमोशनली हैवी मूवी को देखकर हटते हैं तो हम बोलते हैं कि आई नीड समथिंग टू रिलैक्स बट देन वी ओपन अनदर इमोशनली इंटेंस शो टू रिलैक्स so instead of calming down we keep reading the same state. Now the second outcome, aggression and empathy shifts. Hmm. Repeated exposure to certain types of reactions can slowly affect how we respond to situations. This doesn't mean someone becomes aggressive suddenly, but reaction style थोड़ा sharper हो जाता है. For example, if someone is used to watching situations where responses are quick, strong या फिर dominant in real life, तो रियल लाइफ में वो पेशेंस में स्टार्ट रिड्यूसिंग स्लाइटली. Small things will start feeling more irritating than they actually are. And at the same time, एम्पैथी क्या होती है, वो रिड्यूस होनी चालू हो जाती है अपने आप. वो चाह कर नहीं कर रहा होता है कि मुझे सब पर गुस्सा करना है या फिर मेरे को अपनी एम्पैथी रिड्यूस करनी होती है, बट ये थ्रू मीडिया कंजप्शन अपने आप ही होता जाता है. Not because the person doesn't care, but because exposure changes how situation we process. Or एक funny example, earlier someone made a mistake, you might think कि ठीक है भाई होता है, but after constant exposure to high reaction environments, reactions होते हैं कि भाई ये कैसे कर दिया या ये क्या कर दिया, ये आपका एकदम से aggression mode चालू हो जाता है. Now let's move to the third outcome, and this is very important: self-esteem and self-perception. When individuals are repeatedly exposed to idealized images, lifestyle, or abilities, they start comparing, even if unconsciously. और कंपैरिजन का प्रॉब्लम ये है, रियल लाइफ इज मोर इम्परफेक्ट देन व्हाट वी सी ऑन स्क्रीन. सो स्लोली एक गैप डेवलप हो जाता है, व्हाट वी सी and what we are. And that gap sometimes turns into self doubt. For example, someone might start feeling, I should be more confident, I should be doing more, I should be better than this. Not because something is actually wrong, but because expectations have shifted. Now, let's move to the next slide. Evidences. This slide moves one step further. Earlier, we talked about research findings, but here we are talking about what we actually observe in everyday life. मतलब जो clearly visible है behavior के level पर. And three patterns come out very clearly. The first is emotional involvement. People are not just watching content, they're feeling deeply involved in it. You must have noticed this in yourself or others. Someone finishes a movie or a show, and for some time, their mood is still connected to it, right? Now, if I talk about the second part, communication reactions. This is something very subtle and very visible. The way people express themselves, react, respond, like they gradually shift. For example, tone of communication may become direct, quicker, or sometimes slightly exaggerated. हमने कोई इंग्लिश स्पीकिंग वाली या कोई ब्रिटिश एक्सेंट वाली हम लोग कोई रील्स देख लेते हैं या कोई मूवी देख लेते हैं तो हम लोग भी वो चीज ट्राई करने लग जाते हैं सबने किया है राइट तो दिस इज एन अनदर रियल लाइफ एग्जाम्पल so earlier responses might have been more measured. Now reactions sometimes come faster. एक simple relatable situation, someone says something small and reaction becomes slightly bigger than required. Not intentionally, but because exposure has shaped response patterns. Maybe you have seen someone reacting dramatically to a very normal situation and you'll be like, इतना serious भी नहीं था. Now, the third, lifestyle influences. People often pick up small elements from what they watch, not in a copying way, but in a adapting way. For example, छोटा सा छोटा example अगर मैं लूँ तो the way someone dresses, the kind of routine they try, even small habits like how they organize their day. So these can get influenced over time. Yes. Could you please move to the next slide? Real world implications. After understanding different aspects of media influence, it is equally important to recognize that its impact is not only negative. हम अभी तक negative, negative, negative. So it's not just only about that. Media also has a strong positive potential when engaged with meaningful, right? So one of the most significant contribution of media is its ability to spread awareness at a large scale through movies, shows, uh, complex social and health issues are presented in a way that it is easier to understand and an emotionally engaging way. For example, topics like mental health, sanitation, gender equality, or social stigma, which are often difficult to discuss openly,